This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. All right, we've got some sponsors for the pod now.
Wait, what?
Every link you need for the things we talk about here is at artofdarkpod.com/sponsors. First up, books.
If you're into this podcast, odds are you're probably a reader. We've got links to buy new books from bookshop.org and used books from alibris.com.
And if you want to listen to your books, we recommend and use audible.com.
It's great, and the catalog is huge.
All right. So if you're listening to this, you are online.
Maybe you're very online.
You probably have a website or are thinking of starting one. Maybe you want a website like artofdarkpod.com. We built that with WordPress, which is by far the most popular way to create websites. And the single best host for serious WordPress is WP Engine. I've personally used them for over a decade now, and I don't host my websites anywhere else. Go to artofdarkpod.com/sponsors and click on the WP Engine link to learn more.
Finally, the best way to support the show is at patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Get the bonus After Dark content for every episode, access to the book club, and more.
Thanks for supporting Art of Darkness. And I don't think that was too painful. I think we did a pretty good job there.
Yeah, that sounded good.
Yeah, we appreciate it. He picked 3 winners on his first trip. One of them paid $50. It seemed easy to him. And he went on a winning streak after that. And that only helped to increase his daily intake of liquor. So as we were chuckling, that didn't really work.
Yeah.
And he loved the track. He would go to the track, I think, all his life after that. He thought it was great. One day, Jane returned from her job and accused him of making love with a woman who lived in the back apartment. He explained that she had come over with the intention of going to bed with him, but that nothing had happened. Hell, she's just a fat slob. I love you, baby, he assured Jane. It was true that he had no interest in the woman. The neighbor had knocked on the door several times before with the sole purpose of enticing Hank. She lifted her dress up, showing her legs, but he didn't respond. Jane refused to believe him, no matter how he tried convincing her otherwise. Moreover, Jane's daughter had shown up pregnant. Jane told Hank that he would have to move out so she could devote her time to helping her daughter. So that's kind of fallen to pieces. And now he's starting to write poetry. And I have one of the very earliest poems, and I know Jason has a few here. Jason, you don't happen to have the poem Layover? I'll read it. No, okay. No worries. I'll read it, and then I want to introduce Barbara Fry, and then you'll read some of the poems. So this is one of his very early poems. Making love in the sun, in the morning sun, in a hotel room above the alley where poor men poke for bottles, making love in the sun, making love by a carpet redder than our blood, making love while the boys sell headlines and Cadillacs, making love by a photograph of Paris and an open pack of Chesterfields, making love while other men, poor fools, work. It's not a half bad poem. It's not a work of genius necessarily, but
it's got some striking images and
and then the repetition and all right.
I like it.
Not knowing where to send his work, he purchased a magazine called Trace, edited in LA. Each issue contained an updated list of little magazines and poetry journals. He brought the magazine home, closed his eyes, and ran his fingers down the list and landed on a magazine in Texas called Harlequin. Judging by the title, he imagined a little old woman who kept canaries, editing the magazine from a small wooden frame house on a tranquil side street and specializing in rhyming poems. But I said, fuck it, and mailed my poems off. Many such cases.
Yeah. I've been there.
Then this letter came back. The editor, a woman named Barbara Fry, wrote to tell the poet that she had never read work like his and that he was a genius. He was doing better than the first round of short story submissions he had sent during the early 20s. So now he and Fry start exchanging letters, and things heated up. Barbara warned him, no man will ever marry me. I can't turn my neck from shoulder to shoulder. And I don't want to make too much light, but it's an awkward looking woman. If you see a picture of her, she has no neck essentially. And she's very short. They're in the pictures of them. It's a very odd couple. It looks like, as a couple, they look like something out of Alice in Wonderland a little bit, God love her. Hank wrote that he had a scarred face and compared himself to a tiger. We will march through the world together, he wrote. She sent him a few photographs and he thought she looked pretty. In letter after letter, Fry kept referring to the hopelessness of her situation. One night, while in a drunken state, he wrote, for Christ's sake, I'll marry you. Having never met her, pictures only, poems and pictures, LA and Texas. And he sent it to her. The recipient of his offer, however, took it as a serious proposal. She sent more photos. Feeling like a martyr, he thought that at least he would be able to make her happy and resigned himself to his fate. As he thought over what he had done, he reasoned that if you can bring happiness to one other person in the world, then life is worthwhile. They decided that she should take a bus to LA and they would go to Las Vegas to be married in a quick civil ceremony. When the bus from Texas arrived at the station, Hank watched closely as the passengers filed off one by one. Finally, he saw this cute, vivacious blonde who radiated sex and didn't seem much older than 20. Are you Barbara? He asked. Yes, I guess you're Bukowski. I guess I am. Shall we go? All right. As they drove to his place, she told him that she had almost gotten off the bus and returned home. It's kind of scary, she said. I know, he answered. We'll just take it day by day. So they stop off for beer, whiskey. They'd go to his place. They drink. Listen, let's go to bed, he said late in the evening. Not until we're married, she answered. Simpler times. We used to be a proper country.
Yeah. You waited. You waited until you did the crazy marriage in Las Vegas.
Right. She's got some dignity.
Yeah.
The next morning they drove to Las Vegas. The trip across the desert was one of the quickest he ever took. He just wanted to get there. And this is so funny. I just wanted to get there, sign the fucking papers, say what had to be said, and get the hell back home. It was 8 hours going and 8 hours coming back.
Oh, man.
Through all that desert, and it was worth it. We must have stayed in bed about 15 hours. That's so funny. This goes on. Barbara turned out to be about as far from Hank's image of a little old lady editor as possible. The truth is, she demanded so much sex that it nearly drove him crazy. Although it turned out that she really couldn't turn her neck, it never interfered with their sex life.
I mean,
that rocks.
It doesn't really come up that much, you know? You can work around it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty funny.
I don't know. There's something very sweet about this.
Yeah.
Somehow.
There's some good stuff. I'm going to go on a little more.
Yeah.
She decided she wanted to take him to see Wheeler, Texas.
Yes.
He quit his job Brad, look up where Wheeler is.
I will.
He quit his job as a shipping clerk and they left for her hometown. According to Hank, Barbara's grandfather, Toby Fry, practically owned the small town and had even given Barbara her own small house. While they lived in Wheeler, Hank was a marked man. He was supposed to be the guy who had married all this money, the gold digger. Everywhere he went in town, her family had money. People perceived him as the cool city slicker who had gotten the money. He deliberately affected certain characteristics, such as walking around with a swagger in his gait and smoking big cigars. The irony was that her family wasn't all that rich. Tom Fry, Barbara's cousin, a retired airline pilot who lives in the Wheeler area at time of writing anyway, recalls that the family members were not millionaires. There was one working oil well on Toby's place, but it didn't bring in much money. Barbara's father owned a crop dusting business and at one time had 70 planes. He was probably wealthier than his father. In any case, where's Wheeler?
Wheeler's well up into the Panhandle, on the east side of the Panhandle, almost Oklahoma.
Almost Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. We'll have to ask Aaron Gwynn if he's ever been through Wheeler.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who knows? So now he's married. This marriage, how long do you think this marriage lasts, Brad? What do you think?
6 months? A year?
I think they make it a couple of years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Let me read on and then we'll get to the poems. In 1957, Barbara, well, this is one way to get published, by the way. Writing advice from Art of Darkness.
Yeah.
marry the editor.
Yeah.
In 1957, she published 8 of his poems in Harlequin. He was the magazine's co-editor at the time. Jason, do you have a poem called Death Wants More Death? I'll read this section. One of the poems here is called Death Wants More Death, which I think is quite metal. Here it is.
Yeah.
Death wants more death, and its webs are full. I remember my father's garage, how childlike I would brush the corpses of flies from the windows they had thought were escape. Their sticky, ugly, vibrant bodies shouting like dumb, crazy dogs against the glass.
Okay.
Only to spin and flit in that second larger than hell or heaven onto the edge of the ledge. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we're getting somewhere. And we're thinking about his father. Okay. And let's get into what happens with him and Barbara. A rented cottage on a hilltop on the outskirts of downtown became their home. With Barbara working, Hank concentrated on the racetrack, his writing, and drinking.
Yes. Well, someone's got to do the drinking.
Somebody's got to do the hard work. He didn't love Barbara, and often he chuckled inwardly at how he had plunged headlong into this male marriage. They did a lot of things together, such as attending art classes at LA City College and editing Harlequin, but Hank grew restless. As it turned out, so did Barbara. Well, it sounds like she wants a lot of sex.
Yeah.
More and more, on coming home from her clerical job at the sheriff's department, she would tell Hank about this suave, sophisticated man she had met. Barbara became obsessed with the man, portraying him as a real gentleman. She told Hank how her friend had suffered caring for a sick wife who finally died. Listen, Barbara, Hank said one evening, I've bummed all over the country. You know, people play games in offices. They're out of their minds with boredom, you know? Whatever you feel for this man doesn't mean a thing. Keen observer. Yeah. A week or so later at 7 a.m., Hank was awakened by a man who served him divorce papers. He took them, read them over, and went into the bedroom where he awakened Barbara. I'm sorry, Hank, she said. He told her that she shouldn't have gone to the trouble of serving papers. He would have agreed right away to a divorce. They made love one last time. Then Hank took his suitcase of belongings, drove off in his Plymouth, which she had given him, and began looking for a vacancy sign. They were divorced in March of 1958. Their marriage had lasted 2 years, 4 months, and 20 days. The decree included the following. The 1957 Plymouth automobile will be awarded to the defendant, conditional of his paying the balance due on same. Hank kept the car well into the 60s. On rare occasions, he heard from Barbara, who ended up marrying an Eskimo and moving to Alaska. She's having adventures.
Yeah, well, I mean, good for her. That's okay. Yeah,
there you go. And let's see here. Yeah,
she's actually a pretty interesting person, really.
Yeah, she's quite there's a lot going on there. She'd be an interesting subject of her own. Now, I hope you're having a good time. This is the Art of Darkness podcast, artofdarkpod.com. Jason's coming along for the ride. We really appreciate it. Jason, I appreciate your insights. You've got some poems, some of these early poems to read.
Yes.
All right, let's do it.
2 poems from 1959. First one is called Dow Jones Down. How can we endure or Verlaine? This is a hungry band that likes to work and count and knows the special laws, that likes to sit in parks thinking of nothing valuable. This is where the stricken bagpipes blow upon the chalky cliffs, where faces go mad as sunburned violets, where brooms and ropes and torches fail, squeezing shadows, where walls come down en masse. Tomorrow, the bankers set the time to close the gates against our flood and prevaricate the waters. Bang, bang the time. Remember now, the flowers are opening in the wind, and it doesn't matter finally, except as a twitch in the back of the head. When back in our broad land, dead again, we walk among the dead.
See, and that's not what you expect at this point.
Nope.
Right? He's writing about Verlaine. It's called Dow Jones Down. How can we endure? How can we talk about roses or Verlaine? This is a hungry band that likes to work ad count. I mean, again, people have all these ideas about Bukowski, and then you read one of those, you go, what? Yeah. All right, go on, Jason. Go on.
That's good. I liked it.
Okay. So here's a second poem, also from 58. It's called On Seeing an Old Civil War Painting with My Love. The cannoneer is dead, and all the troops. The conceited drummer boy, dumber than the tombs, lies in a net of red, and under leaves, bugs twitch antennae, deciding which way to move under the cool umbrella of decay. The wind riles down like thin water and reaches under clothing, shifting and sorry. Clothing anchored with heavy bones and noonday sleep, like men gone down on ladders, resting. Yet an hour ago, tree shadow and man shadow showed their outline against the sun. Yet now, not a man amongst them can single out the reason that moved them down toward nothing. And I think mostly of some woman far off, arranging important jars on some second shelf and humming a dry, sunlit tune. Section 2. Outside, the quick storm turns the night slowly backwards and sends it shifting to old shores. And everywhere are bones, rib bones, and light, and grass leaning left. And we hump out backs against the wet like living things. And this one with me now holds my yearning like a packet, slips it into her purse with her powders and potions, pulls up a sheer stocking, chatters, touches her hair. It's raining, oh damn it all, it's raining. And on the battlefield, the rocks are wet and cool. The fine grains of rock glint moonfire, and she curses under a small green hat like a crown and walks like a gawky marionette into the streams of rain.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Dang. All right.
There's something more going on here than meets the eye, for sure. And we maybe haven't tracked his whole development into this, but these hit hard. You've got another one, don't you?
Yeah, it's one of the very, very early ones from 1946, actually.
Nice.
Let me...
Yeah, you've been...
And these were all published in Rooming House Madrigals, which was a collection that came out in 1988 of his collected poems from the 40s to the 60s.
Nice.
This is called Object Lesson. It is always best, of course, to push it right below the heart. Don't try to hit the bullseye. When seeking damage, aim for a large target and strike several times. He who pauses is one damn fool. I remember a discourse with a leopard who suggested using hooks and pulleys. Not so, not so.
Hmm.
I froze.
There,
Right. Not so, not so. He was very bitter. It is best to go for the eye, smash the cornea, blind him, then strangle him with rope. My mother suggested an old bathing cap down the throat. Not so, not so. Be safe, be wise. Tell him to seek the stars, and he will kill himself with climbing. Tell him about Chatterton, the lawn. Make suggestions, take your time. He will do it himself. There's no hurry. Time means nothing to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that
There's
too.
Yeah, it's more European sounding than I would expect. It sounds Beckettian, or it doesn't sound like the guy we've been describing.
Right.
No. And my familiarity, I guess, is with his later poetry, because this doesn't sound like the stuff I know at all, honestly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
But at the same time, he's already. What I find interesting is there's no early style, late style. It's early subject matter, late subject matter. He's already mastered sort of how he's going to control the line on the page. These are short lines. They're very discursive. He's going one after another. Sometimes he's going to hit one word as a single line, one word line. He's going against sort of what is popular in American poetry at the time. So if you think about poets like Anne Sexton or Robert Lowell coming out of a more Whitman-esque tradition, they're going to be using longer lines. And already Bukowski is saying that he wants economy when he is writing his poetry. So I think it's really interesting that, yes, subject matter, he's definitely more doing a existential sort of inward looking project here, but at the same time his lines are very controlled.
Cool.
Very cool.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Thank you for reading those. Yeah, we'll have more as we go along. I think I'm going to read what's coming up here. So this will be fun. So several of his poems were published in the late 50s in Gallows, a small poetry magazine that was only published briefly, lasted for 2 issues, like most podcasts. The small avant-garde literary magazine Nomad offered a home for early work. Their inaugural issue in 1959 had 2 of his poems. And a year later, Nomad published one of Bukowski's best-known essays, Manifesto, a call
for
the bingo card. We got a manifesto, boys.
Yeah.
Let's go. Ring the bell. Yeah, it's always a big deal when a manifesto shows up. I'm going to read this. And it's just, as far as I can tell, it's just 3 pages. The insurgency of criticism, from a nosography on poets to a censorious dictum by certain university groups who write the laws of poetry and spawn with sumptuous grace and style their own puppeteers, these and their half-brethren and their purlieu form a most deadly and snobbish poetic fixation. They create, record, and argue their own history, charmed with the largesse of their chosen circumference. You, of course, understand he's being satirical here, right? What the university critics have lost in pulling down the blinds around their little Ivy world, they have gained in direction and prestige. To the remainder of us, the unwashed, the loiterers in pool halls and back alleys, there remains a frustrated and discordant yammering. In order to inculcate a more heuristic force, perhaps a manifesto, a gesture, a gestation is necessary. It is difficult for a single poet to stand against the university coterie. Perhaps we too must invent our own history and choose our own gods if our portion of American literature is to receive a hearing on some tomorrow. Our writers should acquaint themselves with the claustral intent and exercises of the campus group. And let us be fair here. Many of our imprint are not only pretty well unwashed, but rather damn shoddily read as well. Damn shoddily read as readers and damn shoddily read as writers. Our saving factors are our lack of monstrous clannishness and a more hybrid emergence. Yet this emergence should be both shaped and amorphous, with its own critics' guide wiring and giving form and numerical integration, cultural insertion to our writers. This does not mean confirmation or confinement, but a trans-elementation of mixed voices into a more visible shape. The fresh air of a new culture, the magnetism and meaning of and hope, the exactness of our energies, these things haven't in any sense been harnessed or realized. And until they are, 5 or 6 old men, craggy and stedopygous, that is a tough one, stedopygous, in university chairs will be the hierophants of our poetic universe.
Okay.
Somebody studied for the GRE. That is, but you could understand what he's saying there. He's basically saying the academy and those critics control American poetry. We're over here doing our own thing. They pay us no mind, but maybe we need our own critics for our own culture, our own little magazines that we're doing our thing in.
Right.
I think that it's an interesting point to make about how he is not aligned with, he is not a beat. He is not a confessional poet. He has aspects of other schools of poetry that are contemporaneous with him, but he is outside of those spheres. And that's one of the things that he's responding to here. And sure, he'll because he's in LA, he'll run into Ferlinghetti, and Ferlinghetti and him will have a relationship, but he's not part of that cadre. He's not part of the beat scene. And you're going to talk a little bit about his relationship with Ginsberg, I know, Kevin. So that's interesting. But and one of the things that people tend to forget, even about the beats, is a lot of those guys came out of Columbia and were very college educated. And I think in some ways that's also what he's responding to as well. And there's a difference between his small presses and the people that publish him, and even some of the, vanguard of poetry at the same time.
Right on.
Yeah. Amen.
All right. So we're going to move on a little bit. We'll hear a few more poems soon. We're going to get to what happens with Jane, his first love, and his own father. Let's see here. He would write some poems about Fry too, the wife. Henry Bukowski Sr. passed away 9 months after Hank's divorce, while he was in his kitchen reaching for a glass of water on the morning of December 4th of 1958. His death was completely unexpected since he had had no major medical problems. He was not too many years away from retirement. The old man's girlfriend had come to his house in Temple City, not far from the Santa Anita racetrack, knocked on the door and heard no answer. Standing on the porch a few minutes, she heard the sound of running water inside. She knocked again. Then, sensing something might be wrong, she ran to the neighbor for help. They managed to get into the house, where they found him lying on the floor, glass in hand, kitchen sink overflowing. She called Hank immediately to inform him that his father had died. So it sounds like he must have gotten a divorce. A feeling of relief swept over Hank when he heard of his father's death. He had been freed of a great burden. That's not what you want when you die. You don't want your kids to go, whew, dodged a bullet there. Let's see. He busied himself with funeral arrangements, notifying his father's friends. Then he went to his father's house in Temple City, a place he had passed close to on his way to Santa Anita, but rarely visited. So, I see Brad's up and about. I want to make sure he gets this. He began sorting through his father's things. He went outside and watered the lawn and shrubbery. The neighbors came by and then one by one, he started giving them household objects. As he later put it in a story, they left me the garden hose, the bed, the refrigerator and stove, and a roll of toilet paper. He inherited the house in Temple City, and I think he sold the house for $16,000 and gambled and drank the money away as quickly as he could, partly as a protest against all that his father had stood for, seeking wealth, owning several homes, and being finally secure. He had not seen much of his father or his mother before they died. Early in his mother must have passed away between this. Early in his marriage to Barbara Fry, his parents came by one Christmas Eve. Henry Sr. complained about things. The Christmas tree lights weren't put on right. His son did not have a well-paying job. Unable to restrain himself, Hank told his father, "Get your ass out of the house." He told him to leave before he threw him out. His mother protested, saying, "You can't talk to your father that way." But the old man had already stormed out to his car and was sitting there. Catherine Bukowski demanded that her son go out and apologize to his father. "You can't just leave him sitting there," she said. Hank didn't respond. His mother repeated that he should tell his father he was sorry. Sorry for what? "But he's all alone there," she said. "I think it's time for you to leave too." So not a good way to leave mom and dad there.
No.
Yeah. So we got to circle back to Jane, the first girlfriend here briefly, the first love. All right. By 1960, he would end up back in LA working for the post office as a letter filing clerk, and he would have that job for like a decade.
Okay. I was wondering when you said he was there a couple of years. I was like, man, in my head it was like a whole.
Yeah, he was like a part-time carrier. He was like a full-time carrier, and then a part-time, and then he ended up being one of these people that would just like mail would come through, and he would just put it where it needed to go, slot, and he did that for almost a decade. So we'll get to a few more of his poems about Jane. But I want to set us up for that. One day late in 1958, he ran into Jane. Whatever had been smart and attractive about her in the past decade no longer existed. Her body was flabby and her face looked much older. There had always been a vagueness about her, and now she seemed almost invisible. "I saw you with that woman," Jane said, referring to Barbara. "She's not your type." "Yeah, well, she's gone now." Jane told him that she had lost touch with her daughter. She didn't say exactly why, but Hank figured it must have been her drinking. "I'm all alone, Hank. I don't have anybody." Mainly out of pity, Hank began to see her on a regular basis, spending the night in her furnished room in an apartment building at Beverly in Vermont. She drank more than ever, still going on about how hopeless people were, but the fire had gone. She evoked strong feelings of lost love, pity, and guilt in her former boyfriend. He wanted to help her, but when she brought up the idea that they try living together again, he couldn't go for it. She carried with her a sense of overwhelming sadness, which made Hank uncomfortable and nostalgic for their vanished life together. He had enough bad feelings to deal with. The burden of another person's crippled emotions was too much for him to handle. Left with no other alternative, Hank stopped seeing her. This older woman with mournful eyes once was his muse, not for love poems, but his lines were definitely informed by the years they had been together. His aspirations to live and to express the profane sacredness of the commonplace had been hammered into her consciousness, his consciousness, in part by her companionship. People could be happy together without being consumed by greed or enslaved by middle-class values. After leaving Jane, he returned to the Postal Service, beginning a 12-year run sorting mail that ended in 1970. Low pay and horrible working conditions were a reality, but he desperately needed a regular paycheck. So he goes on and he does that. It was his writing that saved him when he heard that Jane had been hospitalized for excessive drinking. Her landlady had given her a job cleaning up the rooms when she couldn't pay the rent. The tasks were not that difficult, but Jane had long ago lost the ability to do any kind of work. Her hands shook, her back hurt, she had trouble going up and down stairs. For reasons unknown to Hank, the realtor who had helped her in past years was now out of her life. The little money she received went for liquor. Even so, the news of her hospitalization and imminent death shocked him. They had spent nearly a decade together. So, like,
Oh,
that's about a marriage. And he
Yeah.
didn't want to believe that this woman who had gone through so much pain was dying at the age of 49.
wow.
He entered her hospital room to find her semi-comatose. It was so clean in there and quiet. I saw her lying in bed, unaware that I was there. He walked up to her quietly, bent over, kissed her lips, and whispered her name over and over again. She opened her eyes and said, I knew it would be you. The several hours he sat at her bedside deeply affected him. When it came time to leave, he bent over and kissed her forehead, then drove to her apartment and found several unopened bottles of liquor given as Christmas gifts by the people whose rooms she cleaned. Enough. Had she not been hospitalized, to have killed her. When Jane died in 1962, Hank contacted her son, who lived in Texas and made plenty of money in business, though he never sent any to his mother. He came to L.A. while Hank continued making arrangements for the funeral, even paying for it himself, thinking that Jane's son would take care of buying the headstone. Hank ordered a heart-shaped floral wreath for which he paid $15, quite a sum in those days. The men who brought it leaned the wreath up against a tree, since the stilts it came with did not work properly. While the casket was being lowered, the wreath fell forward on the ground. Jane's son, a cold and impersonal character, never came through with a headstone. And we've got a poem for her, which Jason has. You care to read this?
I would love to. So this is written in 1962. It's called For Jane, with all the love I had, which was not enough. I pick up the skirt. I pick up the sparkling beads in black, this thing that moved once around flesh, and I call God a liar. I say anything that moved like that, or knew my name, could never die in the common verity of dying. And I pick up her lovely dress, all her loveliness gone. And I speak to all the gods, Jewish gods, Christ gods, chips of blinking things, idols, pills, bread, fathoms, risks, unknowledgeable surrender, rats in the gravy of two gone quite mad without a chance, hummingbird knowledge, hummingbird chance. I lean upon this, I lean on all of this, and I know her dress upon my arm, but they will not give her back to me.
Wow. Yeah, it goes hard. Yeah, you got another one.
Yep. This is from 63. It's entitled Remains. Things are good as I am not dead yet, and the rats move in the beer cans, paper sacks shuffle like small dogs, and her photographs are stuck onto a painting by a dead German, and she too is dead. And it took 14 years to know her, and if they give me another 14, I will know her yet. Her photos stuck over the glass, neither move nor speak, but I even have her voice on tape, and she speaks some evenings, and she again, so real she laughs, says the thousand things, the one thing I always ignored. This will never leave me, that I have loved, and love died. A photo and a piece of tape is not much. I have learned late, but give me 14 days or 14 years. I will kill any man who would touch or take whatever's left.
Yeah, there it is too. I would kill any man. Yeah. All right. And one more for Jane here.
So this was written in 1963 as well, and it's just for Jane. 225 days under grass, and you know more than I. They have long taken your blood. You are a dry stick in a basket. Is this how it works? In this room, the hours of love still make shadows. When you left, you took almost everything. I kneel in the nights before tigers that will not let me be. What you were will not happen again. The tigers have found me, and I do not care.
Yeah. I mean, so he's writing these into the 60s, early 60s. Again, defying, I think, even the portrait we've painted of him. These come out of left field, and there's a rich serious inner life happening here, and clearly a reader as well, and largely self-molded, like a man, his own poet, as you said. Yeah. Thank you so much for reading those, Jason. Yeah, awesome. All right, we'll have some more poetry as we go along, and I think we're going to end up reading a little bit from one of his novels too. Brad, how are you doing? You hanging in there?
Yeah, I'm good, man. This earlier poetry is a surprise. I'm kind of processing it. It's interesting. I'm not going to go on about it at length, but I'll tell you, I am deep in Emily Dickinson territory, and there's more in the middle of the Venn diagram here than I was expecting.
Oh, Brad, this I didn't know we would get to this.
Yeah.
I had a professor in my graduate work that said there are two schools of American poetry. There's the Whitman School and the Dickinson School.
Mm-hmm.
And you choose who you follow, either the Whitman School or the Dickinson School. Mm-hmm. And when I went into doing this research, I would have said Charles Bukowski was definitely of the Whitman School.
Right.
You're absolutely right, Brad. He is entirely within the Dickinson School, and that comes across really, really strongly.
Yeah. Yeah, and these poems you're reading, I mean, the violence, the intensity of the feeling, but there's a certain circumscription. Yeah, there's again, I don't want to go on at length about it, but I think there's an interesting Kevin and I did not plan to do Bukowski and Dickinson for any Bukowski-Dickinson relationship purposes. It was just these were the people on the list in that order. And now we're like, oh man, we're like actually we're suspending some story about American poetry between the two of them. It's very cool.
The same poet who wrote these poems would also write the poem or the little story in a poem type shape about again losing his wallet in the crapper.
Right.
So
right.
Talk about range.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, as far as I know, Emily Dickinson didn't write anything.
Sure, she probably never threw a 10 spot on the ponies, though, right?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait for the Dickinson episode.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're heading into hour 4 of the Bukowski episode with poet Jason Gallagher. We're gonna bring it in. It's gonna be good. It's probably gonna be under 5 hours, I think. And then we're going to come back for Patreon. Patreon.com/artofdarkpod. I'll hit it again at the end. If you like what we're doing, support what we're doing. This is real independent media. This is a couple of guys with microphones in our faces at home. We get great guests, friends, poets. They read poetry for you. What more do you want? Yeah. And you get to learn about a great American writer, Charles Bukowski, you probably had some ideas about. If you haven't read him before, if you haven't read all of his stuff, it's very hard to read all of his stuff. He wrote so much. There's a lot. So anyway, we hope you're enjoying it and we hope you appreciate it. All right, so let's move on. A fellow named Evie Griffith published Bukowski's first separately printed publication, a broadside titled His Wife, the Painter. And a broadside is literally just one sheet of paper with a poem on it. Simple. Broadside. Easy. But still, milestone. This event was followed by Hearst Press's publication of Flower, Fist, and Bestial Whale, Bukowski's first chapbook of poems, in October of 1960. His Wife, the Painter, and 3 other broadsides formed the centerpiece of Hearst Press's Coffin One, an innovative small poetry publication consisting of a pocketed folder containing 42 broadsides and lithographs, which was published in 1964. And just to be crystal clear, nobody's making any money here. Like, yeah, and I don't know what kind of money Bukowski would be getting for this, but hardly anything.
Yeah.
Almost nothing. Yeah. John and Louise Webb, publishers of the literary magazine The Outsider, featured some of his poetry, and he kept getting more, There's a press called Lujan Press. The Webbs published his It Catches My Heart in Its Hands in 1963 and Crucifix in a Death Hand in 1965. And this is where he would meet Frances, who in the documentary I've mentioned a few times pops up as an older woman for the documentary, like with a full kind of, she has like half a beard, like in the documentary.
Okay.
She's got like a white beard, hey, good for her. But it's, you don't see that very often on a woman.
Right.
Yeah,
it's true.
A very interesting moment in the documentary. She was also very funny. I think she's the one who says that he would always talk about his sexual prowess. Mm-hmm. He called his penis his purple onion. Yeah, so that's always fun. And so let's meet Frances real quick, because she would be the mother to his child. Mm-hmm. A woman named Frances Smith, who first became aware of Hank when a friend in LA sent her a Bukowski poem about a cat killing a mockingbird, soon became an important presence in his life. She recalls that this first Bukowski poem she read ends, "And I would have screamed, but they have places for people who scream." She read it over and over again, deciding that someday she would like to meet this man. She went to the local bookstore to see about buying his books. They had difficulty tracing down the publishers, all of whom were small presses. Finally, they located them, and Frances took home Bukowski's first 3 collections of poetry. Rather than pause between volumes, she kept on reading. The force of the poems compelled her to write him a letter. She was a bit of a groupie. Mm-hmm. She mailed it care of Hearst Press. Not long after, a letter came back saying, "Buy my books. My publishers are starving." That rocks.
Yeah.
Frances kept the letter with his address written on it, but didn't write back until she had moved to California about a year later. She'd attended college in Massachusetts, where she'd studied literature and poetry. Okay, great. She arrived in 1962. She lived with her mother in a suburb. Eventually, she wrote him a letter from her mother's house explaining how she felt about his work and included her phone number, not expecting to hear from him. She felt she understood him through his poetry and saw him as a person of great inner strength. I can see that from these poems that you'd go, wow, I'd kind of like to meet this guy. This is some heavy stuff. Mm-hmm. One night she received a phone call. She knew right away that it was Hank. "You have to get over here," he said. "I need you immediately." He's there. Yeah. People, they're sliding into each other's DMs for the kids out there. That's all.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. Getting that phone number. Mm-hmm. He repeated the same thing over and over again, his voice edged with desperation. I didn't understand what the emergency was. And of course, the emergency was that he was all alone and had nobody to talk to. He wanted to make human contact. Mm-hmm. Frances figured out that she was just a convenient phone number, something near at hand, but she had determined to meet him. The closest bus was in Anaheim, and she didn't know the transit schedule. She took his number, walked several miles to Anaheim, caught a bus to LA, and arrived downtown. She called from the station, asking him to come get her. He told her to take a taxi. Frances saw
get a pizza on the way.
Pick up a handle. Maybe. Yeah. Frances saw that,
or like a 6-pack than a pizza, but
So he was more of a beer drinker later on, right?
He drank nicer wine when he finally could.
When he could make, when he had the screw. Yeah.
Well, she saw that he was too drunk to drive, so she hailed a cab and hoped that he would have money to pay. She had no money on her, having forgotten to borrow a few dollars from her mother. I remember when I first saw Hank in the doorway, he seemed so huge and gave off so much electricity. He was like a giant in a fairy tale. He just stood there so kindly, this friendly, kind, benevolent giant. He paid the cab driver and I went in and we sat and talked for hours. I didn't drink, but he was drinking beer. They talked from 2 a.m. until the sun came up. Hank told Frances about growing up in LA, all the stories, the beatings, the acne. He talked about Jane, and he endeared herself to her. And you could see where this is going. Mm-hmm. So that's him meeting Frances, the transplant.
Yeah.
And so flash forward. In 1964, a daughter, Marina Louise Bukowski, was born to Bukowski and Frances. Marina was Smith's fifth daughter, but Bukowski's only child. When he found out Frances was pregnant, Bukowski asked her to marry him, but she turned him down. An LA poet, she is sometimes referred to by Bukowski as the white-haired hippie, the shack job, and old snaggletooth in his writing. So that's fun.
Old snaggletooth, huh?
Yeah, charming.
Okay.
Yeah. I think she has her own Wikipedia. Yeah, she was an American poet.
I was going to say that line about I wanted to scream, but they have a place for people who scream. I was like, that's a pretty good line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I sort of blew by this, but yeah, she did have 5 children. She was divorced in 1960. So she's also kind of, maybe I painted her as a bit of a naif, but I mean, she had her own history and background and baggage, and she was just 2 years younger than him.
Okay.
Yeah, she married a guy named Ray Smith on the East Coast, and they got divorced, and she left her 4 daughters behind back on the East Coast.
Wow.
And then ends up meeting Bukowski. But more than that, she was like associated with the entire poetry scene down there, probably through Bukowski. And she wrote a poem about her, which has been used as a eulogy, One for Old Snaggletooth, which there you go. All right, cool. And if you want to see her, you can watch that documentary I mentioned. So we're getting into the Black Sparrow years, which is the press that Brad mentioned at the very top. He's getting his first broadsides published. And in 1967, so let's put ourselves there, right? We started in the 20s. He's 47 years old.
That's what I was going to say. He's 47.
Yeah. Hasn't really made any money from writing. Not really. He's working at a post office job that he hates. They would do these things called the scheme, where if you were a thrower, you had to throw mail. They talk about this in the documentary. You'd have to like practice so you knew which zip code to throw to which place and da-da-da-da-da. And he said he would come home and he couldn't like lift his arms. He was so tired from this. And of course, this is, you heard those poems. I mean, it's maybe a bit of a stretch to say a genius, but I'll say a genius of a sort, a brilliant man doing that job. It's not an easy job for anybody, but this is a guy who he's going to struggle 5 to 10 times more than somebody else to turn his brain off, but he's only doing it so that he can continue writing. He's doing it to live. Nobody's handing him anything.
Right.
He's still doing it like well into his 40s. But, women are writing him letters because he's got so, it's
not all L's.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of, in the middle there. Fine. Okay, great. And the Beatles have happened now, right? So we've gone from the 20s to the war, 67, Sgt. Pepper's around the corner. What year was Sgt. Pepper?
68.
Was it 68?
No, later than that.
It was 67.
67. Yeah, it came out in 67. So it's like, the year of Sgt. Pepper is happening here. And he starts writing a column, Notes of a Dirty Old Man, for Open City. And when Open City was shut down in 1969, and the founder of Open City had a vision for Open City while tripping acid. And it's that time now in California.
Yeah, it was the 60s, man.
Yeah, I've got a few cities, like times and places that I'd like to be teleported back to. Like I'd love to go see Cocteau Twins in London in the 80s, stuff like that. But also like LA, 1966, like California. Like, please, you can't tell me that wouldn't be a moment.
Sure.
You just go. I'd go work a day job there just to see what it was like for real. Yeah. So we're in a moment now, and he's a part of it. And this is critical. He is a part of it. He was never a hippie. It's like Jason has said, he's not a beat. He's not a hippie. He's a man at a time. He's his own man. And Open City gets shut down in '69, and then the LA Free Press, which picked it up, and then there's a hippie underground paper, NOLA Express in New Orleans, picked this up, and in '69, Bukowski and Neely Cherkovsky, who I think is the fellow I've been reading from, launched their own short-lived mimeographed literary magazine, Laugh Literary and Man the Humping Guns. They produced 3 issues over the next 2 years. So, okay, short-lived, fine. And now we've got the thing Brad mentioned, and I love this story. There's a fellow named John Martin. In 1969, John Martin offered him, I believe it was like $100 a month to write full-time. And apparently they were doing his budget on a napkin. Mm-hmm. Right? I need this much for beer. I need this much for rent. I need this much for child support. And when he said $100 a month, John Martin was like, you can live off of $100 a month? Yeah. And so John Martin made an offer and said, yeah, I'll fund you to write full time. He was 49 years old. He wanted him to quit the post office and write full time. Mm. And Bukowski said of that, I have one of 2 choices: stay in the post office and go crazy, or stay out here and play it writer and starve. I have decided to starve. And if I'm not mistaken, John Martin said, poetry's great, but what do you got to do if you want to make a lot of money, Brad?
You write a novel.
That
tried
is
and true.
Tried and true. Yeah. Yep, just like our friend of the pod, Roberto Bolaño. Yeah, when he needed to make money, he wrote a novel. Yeah,
you go into the gold mine. That's what you do.
That's right. You go when you're dry, you go back to the well.
Right.
And so he said, "Hey, can you write a novel?" And within under a month, Bukowski called and said, "It's ready." What's ready? A novel. And he had finished the draft of his first novel in under a month, and it is called Post Office. Huh. And Jason is going to read us a little bit from Post Office. And it's good. It's actually good. It's amusing. If you've ever had a job that you've hated, which may be redundant and unnecessary, if you've ever had a job, you probably appreciate Post Office. So, Jason, regale us with some paragraphs from this debut novel from the dirty old man.
I was called down to personnel at the old Federal Building. They let me sit the usual 45 minutes or hour and a half. Then, Mr. Chinaski, this voice said, yeah. I said, step in. The man walked me back to a desk. There sat this woman. She looked a bit sexy, melting into 38 or 39, but she looked as if her sexual ambition had either been laid aside for other things or as if it had been ignored. Sit down, Mr. Chinaski. I sat down. Baby, I thought I could really give you a ride. Mr. Chinaski, she said, we have been wondering if you have filled out this application properly. Huh? We mean the arrest record. She handed me the sheet. There wasn't any sex in her eyes. I had listed 8 or 10 common drunk raps. It was only an estimate. I had no idea of the dates. Now, have you listed everything? She asked me. Let me think. I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to say yes, and then she had me. Let me see. Yes, she said. My God, what is it? It's either drunken auto or drunk driving. About 4 years ago or so. I don't know the exact date. And this was a slip of the mind? Yes, really. I meant to put it down. All right, put it down. I wrote it down. Mr. Chinaski, this is a terrible record. I want you to explain these charges, and if possible, justify your present employment with us. All right. You have 10 days to reply. I didn't want the job that badly, but she irritated me. I phoned in sick that night after buying some ruled and numbered legal paper and a blue, very official-looking folder. I got a 5th of whiskey and a 6-pack and sat down and typed it out. I had the dictionary at my elbow. Every now and then I would flip a page, find a large incomprehensible word, and build a sentence or a paragraph out of the idea. It ran 42 pages. I finished up with copies of this statement have been retained for distribution to the press, television, and other mass communication media. I was full of shit. She got up from her desk and got it personally. Mr. Chinansky? Yes. It was 9 a.m. One day after her request to answer charges. Just a moment. She took the 42 pages to her desk. She read and read and read. There was somebody reading over her shoulder. Then there were 2, 3, 4, 5, all reading. 6, 7, 8, 9, all reading. What the hell, I thought. Then I heard a voice from the crowd. Well, all geniuses are drunkards, as if that explained away the matter. Too many movies again. She got up from the desk with the 42 pages in her hand. Mr. Chinansky? Yes. Your case will be continued. You will hear from us. Meanwhile, continue working. Meanwhile, continue working? Good morning, I said.
It has the stuff of theater. It's very funny. He draws a scene. He's inside this guy's mind. This guy just wants to get laid. It's just sizing, it's misogynistic, but it's also confessional, right? Mm-hmm. And it's funny and engaging. And if you've ever had a job that you hated, where you have to deal with bureaucracy,
right?
And you want to be a writer, you are a writer, but you're trapped by this system. I
like that.
It's very, very funny. It's worth reading. It's not a bad novel, right? Is it Hemingway? No, but he's not even really necessarily trying to be. And he's not casting himself as an heroic figure. Or if he is, it's in the sense that like the act of writing that novel itself is kind of the heroism, because ultimately the mind trapped inside of this Kafka-esque American bureaucracy and the sort of capitalism and got to make money to eat has survived. That's the heroism of Bukowski.
Well, spoiler alert, here are the last 3 sentences of the book. In the morning, it was morning, and I was still alive. Maybe I'll write a novel, I thought, and then I did.
Okay, nice.
So I think that sums up a lot of what you were just saying, Kevin.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've read it, so I'm glad that I remember, kind of the vibe. Very cool. Well, thank you for reading that. Let's move on. So now we've got novels, and he would write 6. He would write Post Office, Factotum, Women, Hollywood, Pulp, and Ham on Rye. Not in that order necessarily. I think the last one was Pulp, but they're fun. And the novels, if you're more of a novel person or a story person, the novels are a fun way to get into it for sure. Yeah. And Post Office is probably a more fun read than Ham on Rye. Ham on Rye is a little like, oof. All right. So as a measure of respect for Martin's financial support and faith in a relatively unknown writer, Bukowski published almost all of his subsequent major work with Black Sparrow Press, which became a highly successful enterprise. According to John Martin in the documentary I keep mentioning, it came down to like 1 week where he was down to his last $100. And he was like, well, I'm going to have to go back to work. I tried, but apparently that week was the first week that they went into the black with Bukowski. So this guy just took a moonshot with this guy. He really believed, and he said, this is a writer of his generation, the writer of his generation. And I don't know where Bukowski, how well Bukowski sells now, but I suspect he probably sells a lot better even now than a lot of other writers. So it worked. So it became highly successful. An avid supporter of small independent presses, Bukowski continued to submit poems and short stories to innumerable small publications throughout his career. I love that. That rocks. I really like that part of his character. As noted by one reviewer, Bukowski continued to be, thanks to his antics and antics is a word, and deliberate clownish performances, the king of the underground and the epitome of the Littles, the Little magazine, in the ensuing decades, stressing his loyalty to those small press editors who had first championed his work and consolidated his presence in new ventures such as the New York Quarterly, Chiron Review, or Slipstream. I want everybody who's getting into this new publishing thing to notice this and to remember this, because this is how it's done. You help build up and sustain a guy like Bukowski. When he becomes Bukowski, he doesn't forget you. And if you're that guy, don't forget those people.
Right.
That's how it works. You build an ecosystem, and everybody brings everybody up together. Really, it can be done. Yeah, we're big believers in that on our Art of Darkness. The people who come on as guests of ours are like, they're part of the family. They're part of the network. We're trying to build everybody up. I really think this, you notice when this stuff is happening and when this stuff is gone. Oh yeah. It's like air has been sucked out of the room. Yeah. And you can sort of see it happening. People are realizing, wait a minute, we got to start our own stuff. We have to. Right. You have to. Everything else is dead. Dead. All right. Now he's having some success here. He's a professional writer. Bukowski embarked on a series of love affairs and one-night trysts. One of those relationships was with Linda King, a sculptor and poet. In 1970, shortly after the end of her marriage, King met Bukowski and offered to make a sculpture of his head. He accepted her offer, and they soon became romantically involved. King was 30 years old, and Bukowski was about 20 years her senior when they started their relationship. That's age gap number 2.
But the other way, yeah.
But the other way around. I told you it was coming. Now, this is not the Linda who would become his wife. This was the Linda before Linda the wife. I want to read a little bit here. Well, and this is again from the Tchaikovsky. While Post Office was being readied for release, Linda King, a cherubic brunette destined to become his long-term girlfriend, went to the Bridge one night in 1970 to hear a poetry reading by a writer whose name she forgets. She met Peter, the owner, and the two of them began talking about writers in L.A. Linda asked Peter who he thought wrote the best poetry in town. He told her Charles Bukowski was the best poet in L.A. So she picked up a copy of the first issue of Laugh Literary and Man the Humping Guns from Peter. Oh, man, the 60s.
Yeah.
This included a Bukowski poem called The Grand Pricks of the Hobnail Sun. Linda liked what she read. When she came to the line, God tongues out your asshole, she began to wonder about the poet's sexual preference. Standing in front of the Bridge, she asked Peter if Bukowski was a homosexual. Peter said he didn't know. Quite unexpectedly, Hank, and then the author, Tchaikovsky, and I showed up right then. Love it. Peter saw us in the parking lot at the market across from the Bridge. We had just gotten out of Hank's car and were playfully wrestling in the lot. Okay,
good time.
And that was, people remember from Art of Darkness Live, Brad, when you and I were playfully wrestling outside of like you do. They were making a lot of noise, secretly hoping to attract attention to ourselves. That's Bukowski coming right now, Peter informed Linda. I came up to the door first, and Peter told me that this woman wanted to know if Hank was a homosexual. Not to be outdone by the generally wild Peter, I tossed off, well, he doesn't play around with me. Linda watched as Hank swaggered up to the door and walked inside. He and I sat with Peter on a mattress at the center of the room as the reading began. Hank and I both began making snide remarks, first under our breaths and then loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. Linda, who had come with her sister Geraldine, sat in a far corner. We were entertaining ourselves with beer, wine, and conversation. This is so funny. A few weeks went by before Linda returned to the Bridge to find a bad poet reading to flute accompaniment. Oh, God. I'm just going to move on here.
I feel like Jason has experienced this at one point.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, they keep seeing each other. Linda at one point is dancing, I think on his coffee table. And he's thinking about the sexual drought that had afflicted him for the previous 4 years. Oh. Since Francis, he had not had any relationships that amounted to anything. So he hoped something would develop with Linda. A short while later, Linda sent him a poem in which she called him an old troll and exhorted him to come out and dance in the open meadows with what she termed female fawn creatures. To do so would give Bukowski great... It's the 60s, people.
Mm-hmm.
To do so would give Bukowski great wisdom, she thought. The next morning after he received the poem, Linda drove over to his place, parked down the street, walked up to his apartment, and knocked on the window. Open it up. Open up. It's me, Linda, she called. She caught him in the midst of a hangover and offered to come back later. He told her to stay. They talked for a while. And eventually she told him that she was a sculptor and wanted to make a bust of him. And so she's looking at him as a challenge, and you could sort of see where this is heading. Yeah. I like giving pictures of these various women. Critic Robert Peters reported seeing Bukowski. You're not going to expect this, Brad, as an actor in her play, Sphere to Play, called Only a Tenant, in which she and Bukowski stage read the first act at the Pasadena Museum of the Artist. This was a one-off performance of what was a shambolic work.
Well.
I like the idea of him being so enamored of a woman that he's like, yeah, I'll read your play.
Yeah, I'll read it. And just, yeah.
Can we get the guy with the flute?
Yeah.
Make it a musical.
Yeah.
So their relationship was on and off, and whenever they fell out, Bukowski would return the head to Linda. You take my head back. We're laughing now, but it was like the affair could become violent, and at one point he broke her nose.
Is this the woman that he was? I know in the documentary, an interview I've seen with somebody, he's on the couch with a woman. He starts kicking her.
That's the other Linda.
Okay.
Who he would marry and who would forgive him. But yeah, you could get a sense from that documentary that this guy would get drunk and lash out, hit and kick.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, don't co-sign that kind of behavior for sure.
Yeah.
Yep. So on another occasion, Linda King and Bukowski were accommodated at the City Lights apartment in San Francisco after a reading at their Poets Theater. By the following morning, there was a broken window and a panel smashed in the door, and King had disappeared. He blamed her for the damage. And I got a little more about their... again, you can see where this is going.
Yeah.
Let's see here. So he moves out of Linda's house. After moving out of her house, he rented an apartment in a court with 8 bungalows on Carlton Way off Western Avenue. His neighbors included a stripper, a manager of a massage parlor, and other assorted LA lowlife types.
Yeah.
The surroundings and the people were comforting to him. The place was $105 per month, complete with paint flaking off the walls, an ancient kitchen, and torn curtains. So you about get a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Early in 1975, Linda took a job at Flo's Cocktail Lounge on Sunset Boulevard, working as a hostess. And this fellow named Brad showed Linda photos of Hank with a woman sitting nude on his knee. Brad wanted Linda to comment on the photos. She said they were beautiful before ripping them up. Brad scrambled on the floor to pick up the pieces. I knew the relationship was on its last legs, Linda said. Hank had some woman flying from New York City or some other place to stay on a weekend. I went to Hank's door and looked in the window, and I could see Hank walking around nude while this woman lay on the bed. One night, Linda was at home feeling isolated, looking out the window at a half-dead pine tree ravaged by smog. I knew Bukowski was with another woman. I could feel it from across town.
Oh, my God.
Linda recalls. They really can. I knew I had to get out of the city if I was ever going to break up with him in some final way. I couldn't be just one of his many women. Yeah. So let's see here. Oh, there's some more. As soon as Linda gathered back her strength, she decided to take further retribution on Bukowski. Quite by chance, Hank returned and caught Linda in the bushes with his books. He said, "Give me back my things." You ever had a crazy breakup like this, guys?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, something like it. "Give me back my things. This isn't right." Linda, who had been drinking for hours before coming over to Hank, snapped back. "But it is right." She took his books to the back of the court and threw them through his glass door. Every time she threw one, she said, "And don't tell me about your women anymore. And I don't want to hear any more about what you were doing." Linda had taken his typewriter from the apartment earlier. She went to where she had left it, picked it up, and ran with it to the street, whereupon she threw it onto the pavement. Not knowing what else to do, Hank called the police, who subsequently filed a report on the incident. And then she moved with her 2 children to Phoenix. And then he went to visit her too, but it was over, obviously. And he had his sights set somewhere else. He wrote to her some months later when he got involved with a woman named, you're going to love this, Cupcakes O'Brien.
Oh, yeah.
She's in that documentary too. Hank asked Linda to return to LA and rescue him, pleading that they could have more wild, crazy, fun times together. Linda bowed out. She had had enough and knew that the same cycle would repeat again. I've got something from the other book about some of these affairs, which are fun. This is what Linda King had to say about this. It wasn't that he had other women. Again, this is LA in the 70s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here's what she said. It's that he always wanted me to know about them. Always wanted to tell me all the details about what they did together. Who does that unless they really want to make you mad?
Yeah, he wants to stoke up the drama, or he wants them to think you're.
I don't know what Jason thinks, but I'll go out on a limb and say he was so fucked up from that experience in high school.
Yeah.
That it's like now he's getting women.
Right.
Like,
yeah. I agree with that. Yeah.
And he's just like, devil may care. I'll leave you before you leave me. I don't need you.
Right.
You can go find so it's both that it's just wild insecurity and then boastfulness.
Right.
Yeah.
And then like throughout Love is a Dog from Hell and other later collections that are written around this time, he'll then write these very remorseful poems about how devastated he is about the most recent breakup. So it's very, it's a very push-pull thing. But I think you're right, Kevin, that he just likes to be boastful and he's what they call a late bloomer sexually, and
right.
Got to overcompensate for that.
That I 100% think that's what it is. And they really got into it. And at one point, he ended up in the drunk tank, and John Martin had to kind of come and rescue him. Listen to this. This is when he was still with Linda. Martin called the police back to let Bukowski know Linda was on her way. "Oh, yes, Mr. Martin. Just a moment, please," said the desk sergeant unctuously. "Charles," he called. "Oh, Charles, it's for you." Martin heard somebody asking Bukowski if he cared for a cup of coffee, and Bukowski replying, "Yeah, put it down there. Thank you." It seemed to be a very civil evening in the drunk tank. When he came on the line, Bukowski thanked Martin for fixing things and said the superintendent wanted a word. "Mr. Martin," said the superintendent, "we are taking good care of your friend here. We are all big admirers of his work." It turned out the cops were all avid readers of Bukowski's Notes of a Dirty Old Man column, which had a much wider readership now it was appearing in the LA Free Press. They hadn't even bothered to lock him up. So that's the level of fame we're getting to here. All right.
That's some swagger. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The cops can't even touch me, you bitch. Something like that. I'm sure he said something like that at some point.
Yeah. Well, so here now, and so we're getting up to his writing of women. And if he's going to write a novel called Women, he's going to need to do some research, right? So Bukowski was starting to get quite a lot of fan mail, some of it from women who were attracted to the honest way he wrote about sex and relationships. Now Linda King had taught him a thing or two. He had the capacity to love and love deeply, and a lot of men don't even have that capacity, she said. He wasn't afraid of that. He let his emotions loose. Bukowski let himself feel all kinds of things. One of these women was Joanna Bull, a voluptuous blonde former girlfriend of rock star drummer Levon Helm. She sent samples of her poetry and began visiting him at the bungalow, which he kept as a bolt hole for when he wanted to get away from Linda. I need a bolt hole. Joanna was more interested in Bukowski's mind than his body, but she knew he wanted to sleep with her. And one night, when he'd stayed later than normal and smoked a lot of dope, she resigned herself to it. But her subconscious was apparently set against the idea. When we got to the moment of truth and we were all wrestling around and doing stuff and preparing ourselves, he realized I hadn't taken off my panties. He was absolutely disgusted. Afterwards, she went into the toilet and threw up. It was unbearable to me, she says. Ouch. In July of 1973, he accompanied Linda on her annual trip to Utah. He was looking ahead to writing his novel Women and needed to collect material, as he explained to John Martin. I'm making a study on Linda. If I ever get it down right, someday you'll see the female exposed as she has never been exposed. On their first night in Boulder, the King sisters threw an uproarious party. Every wild character we knew we had there, and I think he was a little taken aback. This is Jerry King, her sister. He was used to being the wildest person at a party, and he had competition at that one. A couple of days later, Bukowski, Linda, and Jerry, together with their children, drove to where the family had a trailer on the side of Boulder Mountain. Let's see. Yeah, this is just talking about a camping trip. In any case, yeah. So he's having other affairs, and I think I've got it. He had one with a recording executive, a 23-year-old redhead. He wrote a book of poetry as a tribute for his love to the latter, titled Scarlet. And these affairs provided material for his stories and poems. Another important relationship was with Tanya. It was a pseudonym of Amber O'Neill, which is apparently also a pseudonym, described in Bukowski's Women as a pen pal that evolved into a weekend tryst at his residence in LA in the 70s. Amber O'Neill, air quotes, later self-published a chapbook about the affair entitled Blowing My Hero.
Oh, boy.
Okay. It's the 70s. I've said it before, but that's kind of where we're at. But this is a cute part in that documentary too, where he's like sexually like stunted. He never got to like let rip. So he's finally getting to let rip, but it's not all pretty, right? Yeah. And I think he suffers from that kind of unfortunate thing that can sometimes happen, where he's such a good writer. He's a very, very good writer. I have the hunch that he's probably cultivated a personality where he's going to get into drama. He's going to create stories and drama and problems, because guess what comes out of it? Fair to say you're agreeing with me, Jason?
Yeah. I think that's fairly, I mean,
need something. Yeah. And it's largely subconscious. A lot of that.
Right. It's not like he's not, as the kids say, he's not doing drama for drama's sake, but he's building a world in which he can, I mean, and so much of what he's writing is auto fiction and auto poetry anyway, as, you know, as thinly veiled as it is, he is his subject, which, you know.
Yeah. And so that sort of forces your hand, doesn't it? You're not going to sit home and collect stamps. You got to have something to write about. And you go from 2 novels on jobs, because I think it's Post Office Factotum, Women, then Ham on Rye. So the first 2 novels are about working life, drinking. Novel about women. Okay, well, I got to research that, right? I got to, because now I got women. Then it's Ham on Rye. Okay, I'm going to go back and look at my childhood. Then Hollywood, I think.
Yeah,
might be that order, and that's his experience having a movie made, and then finally pulp. And anyway,
that's right, Kevin.
Yeah. I've got a little bit about him meeting Ginsberg, and we're making good time here. We're doing well, boys. I hope everybody's enjoying this. This is fun.
This is fun.
This is a fun one. I've been looking forward to doing this one for a long time. All right. And this is from a chapter in Locked in the Arms of a Crazy Life called Getting Famous. Does this face bother you? Bukowski asked the young woman. They were at a party in Santa Cruz after a benefit reading where he had appeared with beat poets Allen Ginsberg, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and Gary Snyder. I mean, you find it revolting, he asked, touching his bulbous nose and oatmeal complexion. No, she answered. I think you should judge a man by the inside of him. Well, good, he said. Let's go and fuck then. Jeez. Although nervous to the point of sickness earlier in the evening, drinking from the flask of vodka and orange to steady himself on stage, one shot for each poem he read, recalls Ginsberg. Bukowski manipulated the crowd of 1,600 with consummate skill, asking them disarmingly, "Isn't this boring?" before giving a captivating reading.
That's a good move.
It is. Ginsberg came on afterwards and was chanting a blues litany when he was told there had been a bomb threat. So I turned to rhymed improvisation and explained the situation in friendly song. The audience began to understand and began filing out of the theater calmly. All the poets followed after the audience left, and Bukowski looked at me and said, surprisingly, "Ginsberg, you're a good man." I was a little apprehensive he'd disapprove of me as academic or a four-eyed queer, but he was agreeable and friendly. When Ginsberg arrived at the party that evening, Bukowski announced with mock seriousness, "Ladies and gentlemen, we've got Allen Ginsberg as guest of honor tonight. Can you believe it? Allen Ginsberg." He called for the music to be turned down and, when it wasn't, said to Ginsberg, whom he'd put in an affectionate headlock, "A man of genius, the first poet to cut through light and consciousness for 2,000 years, and these bastards don't even appreciate it."
Nice.
Ginsberg rubbed Bukowski's back to try and calm him. "That feels good, Alan. Real good," said Bukowski. "Have a drink." Ginsberg said he'd already had enough. "Everybody knows that after Howl, you never wrote anything worth a shit," said Bukowski. Angry his offer of a drink had been rejected, he turned to the people around them and asked, "Has Alan written anything worth the shit since Howl and Kadish?" "Kaddish," Ginsberg corrected him. "Alan, you're tearing me apart. You're a barracuda, Alan, eating me up with your tongue." He laughed contemptuously and reeled off into a drunken bear-like dance with, as Ginsberg recalls, his big pants falling down halfway from behind. He was getting famous now, although not as famous as he would become, accepted as an equal by established writers like Ferlinghetti and Ginsberg.
All right.
What a wild ride from getting beaten in a crummy Rambler in LA and having blood all over your shoulders from pustules of acne to putting Allen Ginsberg in a headlock after doing
1,600 people or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yep. All right. We're gonna move on. We're gonna keep on and bring this home. So much fun. And the After Dark's gonna be great too. We got a great cat poem. And we'll see what else Jason has for us. All right. And his work was controversial, right? Like, it's going to be sexism. There's a fellow named Hugh Fox, who in 1969 published the first critical study of Bukowski in the North American Review.
What year? 1986?
69. He got a critical study of Bukowski in the North American Review and mentioned his attitude toward women. When women are around, he has to play man. In a way, it's the same kind of pose he plays that it is poetry. Bogart, Erich von Stroheim. Whenever my wife Lucia would come with me to visit him, he'd play the man role. But one night he couldn't come. I got to Buke's place and found a whole different guy, easy to get along with, relaxed, accessible. Right? Okay. So he's performing for women. Again, probably overcompensating. We don't psychoanalyze, but you can about imagine somebody who suffered that much and was always on the outside. Now he's the big dog. Now he's the major poet.
Yeah.
And he knows it. And he's a pop figure. He's got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dedicated readers in LA for this column. I mean, he's a star. Yeah. His live readings were legendary, with the drunken, raucous crowd fighting with the drunk, angry poet. We don't have anything like this right now. As far as I don't think. I can't even imagine 500 people coming out for a poetry reading.
And it's a party.
and it's a party.
Yeah.
And it's not stuffy, and nobody's worried about their career. Like, you'd be more likely to get the police called than get a recommendation letter for a tenure, right? Like, yeah, we need to get back some of this energy. It is vital. In 1972, Joe Wolberg, who was manager of City Lights Books in San Francisco, the big beat hippie bookstore, rented a hall and paid Bukowski to read his poems. That was released on vinyl by City Lights and then reissued in 1980. So you can go and listen to this stuff if you want. His readings of his own poetry are really fun. They're worth it. He often wrote of LA as his favorite subject. In 1974, he said, "You live in a town all your life and you get to know every bitch on the street corner, and half of them you've already messed around with. You've got the layout of the whole land. You have a picture of where you are. Since I was raised in LA, I've always had the geographical and spiritual feeling of being here. I've had time to learn this city. I can't see any other place than LA." I've been to LA a few times. I was in LA the last time we were doing a podcast. I was having a bit of a Bukowski time myself. And I'll never pretend to understand LA.
Yeah.
Never. I'm not even going to half try.
It's vast is one thing about it.
It just the light alone. Like, I grew up in North Dakota, man.
Right.
I barely grok Minnesota. Barely. And I spent a lot of time here too. I go out to LA and I know I'll always be a foreigner out there. Always. But LA was Bukowski's town. So yeah. We got a little more to go here. One critic has described his fiction as, so we heard about his poetry, the fiction as a detailed depiction of a certain taboo male fantasy. The uninhibited bachelor, slobby, antisocial, and utterly free. An image he tried to live up to with sometimes riotous public poetry readings and boorish party behavior. God, I'd love to put Allen Ginsberg in a headlock. The more I think about that, yeah, dude, that would have been a hoot. A few critics and commentators also supported the idea that Bukowski was a cynic as a man and a writer. He denied being a cynic, stating, "I've always been accused of being one. I think cynicism is sour grapes. I think cynicism is a weakness." We're coming up to Linda number 2, his, I think, longest partner, or one is certainly the one who would carry him through to the end. In 1976, he met Linda Lee Bagley, a health food restaurant owner, rock and roll groupie, aspiring actress, heiress to a small Philadelphia mainline fortune, and a devotee of Mayor Baba.
Nice. Woo! She's got it all. She's got it all.
She's yeah. What's that Kanye line?
There's a lot of them.
What did he say? Took pills, kissed an heiress, and woke up back in Paris. Something like that.
Something like that.
Another great American poet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll just get a little flavor of Linda here. Little did Hank know that one of the most important persons in his life would come to a reading he gave on September 29th of 1976 at the Troubadour, a popular LA night spot on Santa Monica Boulevard, a few miles west of his apartment. This was one of his last public readings and typically had sold out. The Troubadour's main dance floor was crowded to capacity on the night that Linda, the future Mrs. Bukowski, heard him read. Although she had wanted to meet him for some time, she had waited for more than a year, attending his readings, staying in the background. Linda, who was about 25 years younger than Hank, watched women screaming with passionate intensity at their hero and closely observed his lively responses. The crowd performed nearly as much as the man whom they had come to hear. His motto was to never let the audience rule. Give them room, let them bellow and howl, but keep ultimate control in your own hands. After a decade and a half of practice, he knew the game and played it well. Perceptive fans, though, could sense his vulnerability. Such was the case with Linda. It would not be an exaggeration to say that she saw through the carnival atmosphere and saw him. She admired him and loved his writing. She sensed that his poems were not mere literary invention, but rather represented his innermost self. She claimed that her feeling for him was like almost mystical, right? After the reading, as he was leaving the Troubadour with another woman, she approached him. Just as he walked out of the front door, she handed him a note with her name, address, and telephone number. He responded on the spot by giving her his phone number, and he included a one-line poem, which she can no longer recall, along with a drawing of a little man with outstretched arms. He would do these little drawings. And again, we could sort of see where this is going, right? 2 days later, Hank rang her up at the Dewdrop Inn. That's clever, Dewdrop Inn, a health food restaurant she owned in Redondo Beach, a seaside suburb of LA, close enough to the madness of the city to receive its smog, but also blessed with sea breezes and cool Pacific air. He suggested that they get together. Listen, why don't I drive down to your place, he said. She told him her place was a restaurant and gave him directions. He went back to work, ecstatic at having called. She went about her business, making sandwiches, conversing with her customers, and thinking of him. So there you go. He drives out to see her, and now he's met Linda, and Linda would be the one. 2 years later, he moved from the East Hollywood area where he had lived for most of his life to the harborside community of San Pedro, the southernmost district of LA. San Pedro, like, it's got a beach, it's oceanfront, it's sort of south. I think it's south of LAX. Linda followed him, and they lived together intermittently over the next 2 years. Now, this is cool. The Germans really embraced him because he was born there. He's one of them in a way, right? And I think that their working culture, I think there's a certain quality Bukowski has that maybe the Germans can kind of relate to, speculating. But in May of 1978, he went to West Germany and gave a live poetry reading of his work before an audience in Hamburg. And that was released as a double LP stereo record titled Charles Bukowski. Hello, it's good to be back.
That's a nice little. It sounds like the title of a stand-up album.
Yeah,
right?
Wunderbar. Yeah. Fun. His last international performance was in October of 79 in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and was released on DVD as There's going to be a goddamn riot in here. That rocks. You're like a world famous poet, and you're calling it's punk rock. It's punk little right on the edge of when punk rock's going to start to happen. The reading was produced by fan and friend Dennis Del Torre, who rented a venue, Viking Hall, paid Bukowski and his wife Linda to fly up, hired a video crew, promoted the event, and sold tickets. That rocks. More of that. The crowd and Bukowski were very drunk for the event. Sadly, a heckler was near the stage and can be heard clearly. In any case, let's see. He gave his last reading in 1980 at the Sweetwater Music Vendo in Redondo Beach, California. That's out on vinyl and audio CD. And he and Linda were eventually married by Manly Palmer Hall, a Canadian-born author, mystic, and spiritual teacher.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Who do you know who that is?
Yeah. Manly P. Hall wrote, like, if you don't know anything about esotericism or the occult, but you're curious, read The Secret Teaching of All Ages by Manly Hall. It's the 101 intro book.
To what?
Weird. That's bizarre that he married.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, so as this was happening, the Barfly film project was sort of gestating, and like Sean Penn's on the scene and Dennis Hopper is reading the screenplay. So it's like we're at that level now.
Okay.
During the long, painful birth of the Barfly project, Hank and Linda Begley were married. For several months beforehand, Hank had considered the possibility of marriage, thinking that she had to be a very courageous woman to stick around with him through his drunkenness, his obsession with the racetrack, and his preoccupation with writing. He popped the question in the late spring of 1985. So now we're into like, I was alive.
Yeah.
Or not to date myself, but while they were sitting on the porch overlooking their garden, out of nowhere, Hank said, "Let's get married." "What?" Linda exclaimed. "Yeah, let's do it." When? She asked. Let's make it the first Sunday after my birthday, Hank answered. The ceremony took place on August 18th, 1995, at the Philosophical Society Library in LA, persuaded over by Manly Palmer Hall. There are about a dozen people attending, including John Martin, who served as best man, Marina Bukowski, his daughter, and her boyfriend Jeff Stone, Linda's mother, and her sister Jara. After the marriage, a reception was held at Siam West. Linda had arranged for a reggae band to play, and they invited around 80 people, including poets John Thomas, Steve Richmond, and Gerald Lachlan. At one point during the party, Hank grabbed a wide brim hat covered with gardenias off Linda's head and began dancing as he threw the hat aside. When it came time for Hank to toast his bride, he raised his glass and said, "To my wife, who is searching for something she will never find, the truth." The morning afterward, Hank woke up and laughingly said, "Good morning, Mrs. Bukowski. Good morning, dear husband," she replied. Aww. And now we've got barflies happening. Yeah. And coming into the end here, 1986, Time magazine called Bukowski laureate of American lowlife. Regarding his enduring popular appeal, Adam Kirsch of The New Yorker wrote, "The secret of Bukowski's appeal is that he combines the confessional poet's promise of intimacy with the larger-than-life aplomb of a pulp fiction hero." Barfly comes out in 1987. This is like an A-list movie. I mean, it's got Mickey Rourke. It's a black comedy. Faye Dunaway. It's about Charles Bukowski. Yeah. Kind of insane to think that ever happened. Now, probably didn't hurt. It was a $3 million budget. It did 3.2 in the box office, so it didn't bomb, but it wasn't like a major hit. It was nominated for a few things, not an Oscar. It was a nominee for the Palme d'Or, but it's just like, it's an amazing thing to think. And it probably didn't hurt that he was a denizen of LA for him to get a movie made.
Right. He's our guy. He's our guy. Like, you think of like the Big Lebowski movie, the dude is a real guy that the Coen brothers made. Right. It's almost, except Bukowski's got this, this literary career as well. But
mm-hmm. Yeah, and Bukowski had mixed reactions about the performance of Mickey Rourke. In an interview in the documentary I've mentioned, he said Mickey Rourke didn't get it right. He had it all kind of exaggerated, the mannerisms untrue. He was a little bit show off about it. So no, it was kind of misdone. Yet the original 1987 press kit for the film included a letter by Bukowski apropos the film titled "A Letter from a Fan," in which the writer stated, "Part of my luck was the actor who played Henry Chinaski. Mickey Rourke stayed with the dialogue to the word and the sound intended. What surprised me was that he added another dimension to the character and spirit. Mickey appeared to really love his role, and yet without exaggeration, he added his own flavor, his zest, his madness, his gamble to Henry Chinaski, without destroying the intent or the meaning of the character. To add spirit to spirit can be dangerous, but not in the hands of a damn good actor. Without distorting, he added, and I was very pleased with the love and understanding he lent to the role of the barfly." Yeah, that sounds like genuine. Doesn't sound genuine at all. Yeah, they're trying to put butts in seats.
Of course they are.
Yeah. Bukowski had confided to the film critic Roger Ebert in an interview conducted on the set of the film that he thought Rourke was doing a good acting job. "I didn't really expect him to be so good." So who knows? And then he novelized that in the book Hollywood, which I must have read many years ago. But it's been a long time since I read it, and we're coming up to the end. Boys, this is the end. I mean, I just think about him in like 1920, 1930, a 10-year-old boy mowing the grass to hanging out with Sean Penn, and getting phone calls from Bono.
Wait, did Bono call him?
Yeah, Bono called him
because he was hanging
out. Right? Yeah. But he was hanging out with Sean Penn.
Well, yeah.
And Sean Penn's friend with Bono. You got to remember too. This is the 80s. The U2 was like the biggest band in the world there for a minute. Yeah, and whatever else you think about it now, it's like, damn, what a trip for this guy.
That's huge.
Massive. And he did it, and he survived. So I'll bring us in here. Hank's last novel, Pulp, was published in 1994, the year of his death. It's dedicated to bad writing. That's what it says at the top. Dedicated to bad writing. A jab at the carefully constructed American novels that he used to read and find abhorrent. The clean fingernail boys is what he called the writers of formula fiction. Even though Hank's health was failing, the story came easily. He had fun writing it. If you have to fight with your words, something's wrong, he used to say. Trust your instinct. Don't pull back. Even if you fail, you can get up and try again. Against death, he added a character named Lady Death and sparred with her throughout the novel. Hank died on Wednesday, March 9th, 1994, at San Pedro Peninsula Hospital from leukemia, Linda and Marina at his bedside. The LA Times ran a front-page story on the city's most celebrated writer, dubbing him poet of LA's lowlife, a predictable touch of journalese. The obituary in the New York Times described him as a descendant of the romantic visionaries who worshipped at the altar of personal excess. But the most fully rounded picture of Bukowski came from the poet and teacher Gerald Laughlin, who wrote a piece for the LA Reader, Charles Bukowski, A Remembrance. Laughlin tells of Hank's beginnings as a little magazine figure and his importance as a spokesman for all those on the bottom. During his illness, he continued writing prolifically. People who talked to him at home or while he was in the hospital sensed a vulnerability, yet a stoical acceptance of his condition. At the end of a conversation with Sam Cherry, who had known him since the early 60s, he said, "The time is coming when I'll have to put the gloves down. I can feel Papa Death. He's standing on the next corner." On March 14th, his funeral was held at Green Hills Memorial Park in Palos Verdes, not far from his home. Among the friends in attendance were John Martin, Sean Penn, Carl Weisner, Steve Richmond, John Thomas, and Red Stoldowski. Linda Bukowski chose the words, "Don't try," to place on his headstone with an etching in the stone of a pair of boxing gloves. And I've got a little more here. And Jason, you can maybe read this business if you want. This paragraph I'll highlight. The funeral rites orchestrated by his widow were conducted by Buddhist monks. He's interred at Green Hills Memorial Park in Rancho Palos Verdes. An account of the proceedings can be found in Gerald Laughlin's book, Charles Bukowski, A Sure Bet. This phrase, "don't try," he uses in one of his poems, advising aspiring writers and poets about inspiration and creativity. He explained the phrase in a letter to someone in 1963. Jason, you want to read this explanation?
Somebody asked me, "What do you do? How do you write, create?" "You don't," I told them. "You don't try. That's very important, not to try, either for Cadillacs, creation, or immortality. You wait. And if nothing happens, you wait some more. It's like a bug high on the wall. You wait for it to come to you. When it gets close enough, you reach out, slap out, and kill it. Or if you like its looks, you make a pet out of it."
Yeah, I like that.
I mean, and that's it. His archive was donated to the Huntington Library in San Marino in 2006. Copies of all editions of his work published by Black Sparrow are held at Western Michigan University, which purchased the archive of the publishing house after its closure in 2003. Echo Press continues to release new collections of his poetry, culled from the thousands of works published in small literary magazines. According to Echo Press, the 2007 release, The People Look Like Flowers at Last, will be his final posthumous release, as now all his once unpublished work has been made available. We'll talk about the editorial controversy on the After Dark for Patreon. If you haven't had enough of us, you want another 30 minutes, patreon.com/artofdarkpod. We're going to have some good stuff. I'm going to let Jason finish with the poem. This is maybe a little on the nose. This is maybe his most famous poem. I love this poem. It's a double banger. Man. It's beautiful. Jason, read us out with Bluebird.
Bluebird. There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too tough for him. I say, stay in there. I'm not going to let anybody see you. There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I pour whiskey on him and inhale cigarette smoke. And the whores and the bartenders and the grocery clerks never know that he's in there. There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too tough for him. I say, stay down. Do you want to mess me up? You want to screw up the works? You want to blow my book sales in Europe? There's a bluebird in my heart that wants to get out, but I'm too clever. I only let him out at night sometimes when everybody's asleep. I say, I know that you're there, so don't be sad. Then I put him back, but he's singing a little in there. I haven't quite let him die, and we sleep together like that with our secret pact, and it's nice enough to make a man weep, but I don't weep. Do you?
But I don't weep, do you? That's a killer poem.
Yeah.
Oof. And that's the life of Charles Bukowski.
Dang, nice work, Kevin. Nice work, Jason.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like I learned a lot about somebody I thought I kind of knew, which that's the thesis of the show in a lot of ways. But yeah, I really want to go back to some of this early stuff. I'm gonna have to get my hands on some of the early Bukowski. I'm a hipster like that. I'm into the early. But yeah,
they are shocking poems, aren't they? There's more going on than you would expect.
Yeah.
Quite a talent.
And yet he refined his voice, and he was prolific.
Thousands and thousands of poems. Apparently, that's amazing.
Yeah, very, very good. Well, we got to bring this in, and then we'll come back for the After Dark. I'm going to remind you the topics we're going to cover. If you like what we do, please support us, patreon.com/artofdarkpod. You can also support us by 5-starring us on Spotify, iTunes. Tell your friends. You got a friend who likes Bukowski? Share this with them. You got a friend who doesn't like Bukowski? Share this with them.
Share this with them.
Just share. Why not? It's free. Right.
Yeah.
But really seriously, we legitimately appreciate all the material support we get. I know Brad loves hearing from people on Twitter. It's nice to see the Twitter account grow. Yeah. Brad, for the bingo card, can't forget, what would Charles Bukowski be doing today?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to keep writing. I mean, there'd probably be continued attempts to make films of the stuff. I mean, they made Factotum sometime in the 90s, I think.
I think it was in the aughts. I think it was like 2000.
Really? It was in the aughts.
Yeah. Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah.
So you might get more work would come out. You might get another one of those. What I think would be interesting because what I'm kind of getting from this is he is a bit of a character, and then as the fame comes, he sort of has to become more of that character, right? It's an amplification of the guy he already was, and then the books are kind of generating, like, he's one of these guys who the art is actually being Charles Bukowski, and the stuff comes out of it to some extent, right? I don't know how that looks as time goes on. Like, can you maintain that? Does it explode at some point? Does it burn out? So that's very curious to me. And I think you would end up seeing you'd probably end up seeing different phases of that lifestyle.
Yeah, and this question is always a little ambiguous too, because it's sort of like, well, what if Bukowski came back and he was 30 years old right now?
Right.
What would he be getting into?
Yeah.
I mean, I think if we had the fully realized Bukowski at the end of his life had another 20 years and he was dropped right here, it's hard to know what he'd be doing. But he got into the comfy lifestyle. He got money. He got fame. He didn't have to work a regular job.
Right.
And it sounded like he had settled down a little bit by the end, and that he and Linda had kind of figured it out. That's the impression you get anyway. But that could have just been him just getting older too.
Well, you slow down as you get older for sure. I think of for some reason, I think of, the David Lynch's weather reports he was doing for a while. Maybe he still is. Not saying that Bukowski would do a weather report, but I could imagine him having like a daily couple-minute video, where he just comes on and like talks shit for a little while and says something kind of profound and a little strange and wishes you luck in your bullshit job. And
right. Yeah.
So you think he would embrace new media. I think that's an interesting point, Brad. Is he a TikTok, Instagram guy? Is that
I think he might have gone, not that he wouldn't have written it all, like it wouldn't have been trading it in, but I think he would have. I mean, he liked doing these readings, right?
Yeah.
And he was clearly able to like be incredibly productive, right? Like, 2000 poems. I mean, I know he lived a fairly long life, but that's a lot of poetry.
Well, he wasn't really writing poems until he was 34, 35 years old.
Right.
So.
Plus 6 novels on top of that, plus a column on top of that. I'm sure he would have the bandwidth to do that little bit. So I do kind of think he would do something like that, in addition to continuing to write.
In an interview that I read with Linda, she said that he was, towards the end of his life, incredibly dedicated to craft. He would take a bottle of wine up to his Macintosh and work until 2 o'clock in the morning and then go to bed. But he was on as strict of a schedule as possible to be a writer. And I think that goes to what Kevin was saying earlier about how age may have changed him as well. But I don't know. I think there's a degree of myth making that hides the craft.
Yeah. Right. Because you can't look. Yeah. This stuff isn't supposed to look as though it's spent hours crafting it. Right. It's supposed to. He's kind of a drunken raconteur poet figure. Yeah.
And I think when you, having listened to this episode of Art of Darkness, have now been exposed to some of the early poems, it puts the later stuff in a different context.
Yeah.
Because you go, wait a minute, this is a guy who can do that, but then he chooses to do this other thing. Let's look at the whole picture.
Right.
I do have
strategic.
It is, and I will add another topic to the After Dark. I'm gonna add a topic because I've got it in one of these books, and I'll share it for Patreon. It's when he got his Apple computer.
Oh,
let's read about when Bukowski got his computer.
I'd like to see the Apple. You know how they do those Apple commercials or the Apple ads, just like he's getting pissed off at it in some way, kicking it. This piece of shit. Yeah, that'd be great. Pouring booze on it.
Yeah. So here we go. We're going to come back in a little bit for Patreon, for the After Dark. We do this for every episode. We're going to talk about the editorial controversy for his posthumous writing. We're going to talk about meeting R. Crumb, the great comic artist. We're going to talk about the FBI file. We're going to talk about his love of cats, and we're going to get a poem about cats. And we're going to talk about his computer, the computer that he got. So we're going to go big.
All right.
And what do you're both writers, right? What do you think about this piece of advice really quickly? Don't try. What do you think, Jason? Is that good advice or bad advice?
I think he goes back to it again and again in its poetry. I think he's right in the sense that so many people get in their own way to creating. And if you're trying to be a writer, then that keeps you from being a writer. A writer writes. They don't try at the act of writing. And I think that's really what he's getting at there, because there are several later poems or poems that he writes in the 70s that he goes back to that well and tells people that's his advice to all the things which is interesting. I mean, because he's not an MFA guy, right?
Right.
We talked about this. He wrote and learned to write through writing. So, like, thinking about it, intellectualizing it, making it a precious object, that's de rigueur to him. It's due. It's due.
Right. Yeah.
Co-sign, Brad.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, he's clearly not saying one way you could interpret it, which is like almost like don't bother.
Right.
That's not what he's saying. He's speaking on a deeper level about like sort of where how I would say it would be like, how do you access the muse? Well, you can't preen too hard. You can't beg the muse, but you can, like he said in that thing, I mean, this is, I'll tell you what, like from depending on your definition of the words, I try my ass off writing, but a lot of it looks like me sitting right here, just doing this.
Right.
And then eventually, I see that fly on the wall
and I'm like, eyes around.
Yeah, that's it. That's okay. Now I can put that in, and hours can pass that way. And am I trying? I don't know. I decided to sit in the room for an amount of time, I guess. That was the trying. The trying came before, almost, right?
Was it Faulkner who said, "Don't be a writer, be writing"?
I think something like that. Somebody's
yes. It said sort of like, don't posture, right? Don't be like, don't be saying I'm working on my novel. Be working on
it. Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's also.
I didn't know about the funeral being, the funeral rites being a Buddhist ceremony. That adds actually another dimension to it. To that his wife, who decided, who knows how much he has subscribed to the sort of tenets of Buddhism, but her just putting that on the headstone and doing the rites, that adds a whole zazen quality to it that I hadn't really thought about before.
He says at the end of that great documentary, Born Into This, that when he died, his face was as smooth as a baby's.
Really?
Even after all of that, all of the scars and everything.
Yeah. Wow.
We're going to come back on the After Dark with the great Jason Gallagher. Brad Kelly will be there. We're going to talk more Bukowski. Patreon.com/Art of Dark Pod. And before I send you both on your way, I just one of you had better come back drunk.
How much time?
How much? Yeah, exactly.
Don't try.